o'clock, is that it?
Excuse me?
You're getting a call at 7 o'clock about.
No, I'm on Zoom. Okay, we're just waiting. I want to see who's joining.
You hear them in your phone? Check this microphone.
Chris? Oh, somebody named iPad.
Your mic was on.
What?
What are you doing today?
Oh,
They thought I did it, but I want.
He recently wrote his book, filling an empty journal with 81 pages of words and illustrations featuring an exploding Christmas tree and a giant turkey.
It's for the adventures of doing how they Christmas, of doing how they kiss up.
That's right. It's so good. He found it along on the shelves of the Ada Community Library in Idaho. So, ever so discreetly, he took the initiative.
Then I came in this tile, this tile, and then I put my book right here.
What were you afraid of?
The library catching me.
Were you afraid you might have been in trouble?
I haven't really thought about that.
100%. I also want to ask a question about bail reform. How will you ensure that all have equal access under the law?
Hello, everybody.
That is our core
poor principle in our system. I don't
Excited
know.
to have everyone on here. I'm gonna go ahead and mute some
Are we
people.
unmuted?
Muted upon entry.
Looking at
So looking forward to tonight's forum. We have a couple minutes or a minute or two to get the rest of
when we sit
our
someone
attendees.
36.
Nice.
prices. So
Can you hear me, Joe?
we're
I
operating
can. Hi. I'm going through and muting people.
equitable as very possible. So one thing the office is going to do, maybe you're familiar with, there was a study by the Bureau Institute in 2015
Are we unmuted?
commissioned by my predecessor.
You are unmuted. Hi, Sylvia.
Equities, and it showed that at every step along the way that had.
I believe that's DA Bragg speaking right now on Alan Oster's microphone.
There were
I know. I'm trying to mute them, although I
that's a great historical
do
report.
hearing out.
Looking at what I've done.
All right, there we go. Much
Can you
better.
hear me, Joe?
I can. Hi, Sylvia.
Okay, good. Thank you.
I do see Tom shows up, his name. but-
I'm here.
Tom's over here with the, here he is peeking in.
Hey, guys,
Hey,
how are you?
looking good. Nice background.
He's got the,
I've got the timer.
you're recording
Oh.
this, aren't you, Joe?
I am recording this. I already.
Good, okay.
But I should let everyone know that this will be recorded.
Echo, shut down.
All right, everyone should be automatically muted upon entry, but please double check that you are. So
It wasn't.
Hello, everybody.
We were all unmuted.
You're unmuted. Oh,
Okay, I see. Okay. All right. Well, hello, everybody.
hi, Charles.
You
It's 7
all.
o'clock. So should we get started?
What time is it right now?
7 on the nose. I don't know if
Maybe we want to, are our candidates here? I see Chris Lebron and Tony. Is Lowell here?
And my co-chair,
Lowell is not coming tonight. Did you get the email?
No.
He said he had a family crisis and he won't be here. tonight.
Okay, thank you for telling me. Okay.
I
Well,
just
that
got it.
means-
I just got the
That
email.
means this is going to go even faster. Okay, do we have
I've only been,
Amber and Layla? Are they here?
I'm right here. Hello,
Here
everyone.
it's right here.
That they have.
Oh, there's Layla. Okay, and where is Amber?
Hi, Sylvia. Physically assaulted.
Everybody goes to picture. Okay, I want to see faces. I like to see faces. Hi, Tony, how are you? Okay, I think we're ready. If you're ready, Joe.
I am. Well, hey, thank you. I do want to introduce our district leaders and moderators for tonight who have been working tirelessly to put together a really good forum for today. So thank you to Sylvia Pietro and Charles Bear, our district leaders. And I appreciate our candidates jumping on and making themselves available. I think we're going to have some really good questions. So I know I've had a little bit of a preview from Charles and Sylvia, so I think this should be really informative, help everyone make a great decision about a very important role that's finally, that's opening up after, Assemblymember Godfrey has announced his retirement. So thank you again. And a little plug, please do mute if you find yourself on. I will be monitoring it and doing my best to mute people. But I appreciate, I think it'll help all of our experiences. So thanks, Sylvia. I'll turn it over to you.
Well, I want to welcome everybody. This is the first assembly forum that CRDC might have had in 52 years. So this is a really big night. And I want to thank you all for coming and for participating by showing up. It's a very important time for all of us in Chelsea, Part A and Part B, Hell's Kitchen in Chelsea, that we have the opportunity to ask questions of our candidates who are interested in running for this important position. So I want to thank you all for coming. The candidates will have 3 minutes to.
I cannot hear anybody.
Okay, Brian, somebody's,
Why can I not hear
okay,
anybody?
little one, okay,
Why
everybody
can't I
mute
hear
yourself.
anybody?
We have to mute there. You could run for office, it sounds like, in about 20 years. So this is pretty good. But again, I'll get back to the candidates. The candidates have a full 3 minutes to tell us about
Jonathan and
yourself.
I have our work cut out for us. We've got to have a little meeting.
There are loads of people who are unmuted. There are
Everybody mute yourself, please. Please mute yourself. Joe,
Donna,
can you
an
mute
iPhone.
everyone?
I'll
There's
go
a
with
Donna
unmuted.
who's unmuted. There's an iPhone that's unmuted. There's a Colette that's unmuted. Franny's unmuted. I mean, please,
I'll go through and mute everyone.
thank you. Just mute them all.
Everyone's been muted. Sylvia, you can unmute yourself as we go through this.
You can do it in the bottom too. Can you hear me now?
We can. Thank you.
Okay, I'll start again. Welcome everyone to this assembly forum being held at CRDC. We have lots of people on tonight. There are over 70 people on this Zoom call. So I want to welcome everybody that's online tonight to listen to the questions. The candidates themselves, and they are Tony Simone, Amber Necosi, Layla Jazico, and Chris Lebron. They each have 3 full minutes to tell us something about themselves and their background so that the audience knows why they're interested in this position, their background, the things that they've done in the past. Now, when it comes to answering the questions, please listen very carefully, because I will not be telling you ahead of time that the question is meant for you. Some questions have a longer lead-in than others. So it gives you an opportunity to really listen before you're called upon. And so with that, I'm going to ask Tony Simone to unmute himself and please tell us about yourself. Thank you, Tony, for coming.
Thank you, Sylvia. Thank you, Joe. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, CRDC. I know you all are advocates and fighters for the community and for our Democratic Party. I've stood alongside with you since the days I was with Tom Schuler and Tom Duane and others fighting the good fight. And I'm so happy to be here with you tonight. A little bit about myself. I have served the West Side communities my entire adult life. I live in Hell's Kitchen with my lovely fiance, Jason, and my very loud dog, Radar. My grandfather was a union delegate. He taught me the importance of collective action to find bold solutions. Also, I most recently worked at Hudson River Park, Friends, where we fought for open park space, working together with the community board to ensure that Pier 76 is now open park space for all. At the city council, I was director of community outreach, where we fought hate crimes, worked with state government and advocates to pass marriage equality, and helped tenants defend them against bad landlords. I'm running for assembly because I believe that together, all of us, not just me, can make our city, our district, and our state more livable, equitable, and healthier for all of us if we do it together. I hope I can earn your support. Our campaign is going strong, growing stronger every day with many of you I've talked to over the last few weeks and months. Today, we are endorsed by my mentor and hero, Tom Duane. And I hope as we go through this process and this journey of campaign, many of you will be with me. Regardless of the outcome of our forums and tonight, I want to hear from you. I want to listen to you. I'm going to use the same style I used throughout my career in city and state government to work with coalitions to find solutions to complex problems. Thank you so much for offering this opportunity to speak to you all. Thank you for all you do. I know how hard all of you work in the community. I hope to work alongside of you when I become your assembly member. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Tony. The next speaker will be Amber Necosi.
Hi, good evening. I'm Amber Necosi. I'm a lifelong resident of Chelsea. I live here with my wife and our 2 school-age children. I am currently the president of Penn South, which is one of the largest and most successful affordable housing communities in New York. We're almost like a city within a city. We cover an area of 6 city blocks. We have about 5,000 residents and 27 commercial tenants. We produce our own energy. We have multiple public playgrounds. We have about 500 trees on our property and an amazing senior center that serves residents throughout Chelsea, Hell's Kitchen, and the Village. In my day-to-day responsibilities, I have to address not only the needs of the residents, but the operations of the co-op. And I work with all of our city and state agencies. I work with HPD and HUD. I work with the city council and with the assembly's office and the senator's office. I've already worked on getting legislation passed this year through both Albany and city council. So this is a world that I'm immersed in and I know very, very well. And I have to remain both proactive and effective because I have thousands of residents that hold me responsible every day. One of the most important things I do as president is bring people together to solve problems. And Penn South is dealing with a lot of the same issues that we're seeing throughout the district. So we're dealing with garbage and graffiti and crime, homelessness, sustainability and affordability. And I have to be able to do all of this on a budget. So I'm proud to say that Penn South is in a much more stable and financially secure place today than we have been in the last year. And I was just unanimously reelected as president. I have deep roots here in Chelsea. I have 4 generations of my family that have made Chelsea our home. I was raised here by my grandmother, who was a city social worker, and she taught me the importance of community service and service to others. I studied human services in college, and I've gone on to work with many, many nonprofits throughout New York and several throughout the district. My wife and I are very active public school parents at PS 11. My wife has been a teacher in this district for 23 years and is a member of the teachers union. I myself have served on the community board. I was there for 6 years. I had a focus on education and housing, land use, and quality of life issues. I was raised in a very socially and politically progressive home, and I am very comfortable taking a stand on issues that impact us. I would be honored to be an advocate for this community in Albany, and I hope to earn your support. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Chris Lebron. Good evening.
Good evening, District Leader. How are you doing today?
Fine, thank you.
Excellent. First, I'd like to thank you for the invitation. I'd like to thank everybody who's attending today. I also want to thank Richard Godfrey for his 51 years of service, soon to be 52 years of service. You have been my assembly member my entire life. I recently found a photo of my mother and myself in a stroller and the assembly member. The good fight has always been with you, and you've always managed to build out coalitions and communities and supported block associations and tenant associations and all that they've done. My name is Chris Lebron, and I'm also born and raised in the 75th Assembly District. My mother was a New York City public school teacher and later became a guidance counselor. She retired. My father was a federal employee. He was a postal worker for almost 30 years on the Upper East Side at Gracie Station. I'm public school educated, as is my little sister. And I started my career during a recession. I was a freelance marketer by trade, which means that there was a lot of struggle to find the ability to live worry-free. Healthcare has always been an issue for me. And it's been an issue for a lot of people in my generation, millennials as we're called. When I left the world of marketing, it was to organize my tenants, my neighbors, the people that I grew up with here on 47th Street between 8th and 9th Avenue. They had known me as a young child. My mother was a block association president. She was also Midtown North Precinct Council president. And I was tasked with building a safety net, a safe space, because our landlord was utilizing most of the apartments in the block as illegal hotels. It took a moment where we felt less than human. There was a flood in our buildings and the landlord decided to attend to the Airbnbs. It was the time to act. I utilized my connections in Manhattan Community Board 4, connected with members of the West Side Neighborhood Alliance, and ultimately fought back with the help of Assemblymember Gottfried's office, Councilmember Johnson's office, and the Illegal Hotel Working Group. We were able to, as a coalition, pass anti-Airbnb legislation, and I'm happy to say that there are no Airbnbs on West 47th Street. Those apartments have been vacated of illegal hotels and are now being housed, or now rather housing families and individuals who want to take root here. I consider myself more of a housing advocate than anything else. It's my pride. It's the most important thing. So when I joined City Council with the Black, Latino, Asian Caucus and later at the 41st Council District, I chose to serve the chair of the Public Housing Committee. Mom and dad are both from NYCHA originally.
Hey, that's the
Thank you.
bell.
I just want to say, if you go to Chris Lebron for NewYork.com, you can find out more about me. I'm so excited to talk to you all. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Chris. The next is Layla Gazico. Layla, where is Layla? Here she is.
Hi, thank you so much, Sylvia. Thank you to the Chelsea Reform Democratic Club for having me. And thank you for Assemblymember Gottfried for inspiring all of us. Those shoes are really big to fill, and it's really an honor to be here. My name is Layla Gazico. I was born in Paris of a French father and a Tunisian mother. I moved to New York in 1997 when I was 25. As so many immigrants, I came to pursue my dream and to find opportunities. I built a career in journalism, and I was fortunate to do meaningful work. In 2000, I uncovered a labor scandal in garment factories in small US territory named Saipan. A few years later, I produced a damning expose about police brutality. I never cried so much than when I directed a documentary about Columbine High School survivors. I met my husband in New York, and we raised two beautiful children in this great city. 16 years ago, I joined my community board, and this is what it has taught me. Get involved, listen, and get to work. And this is who I am. I'm someone who shows up, who listens, and who gets to work. During the East Midtown rezoning, I helped secure union jobs in construction and hotel projects, and we made the plan a better plan. I have advocated for true and permanent affordable housing in our district, a tough fight given how speculative real estate is in our community. Since its inception, I have led the fight against the Penn Station project, a land grab favoring Vornado. It hasn't been easy. When the project was introduced, the state tried to bar me from getting involved. They tried to rush the process through in the midst of COVID. But with tenacity and the help of a great coalition, including Assemblymember Gottfried, the state had no choice but to slow down. Along the way, I've read thousands of pages of documents, attended dozens of meetings, called attention to the mortal flaws of this terrible project. I've testified at every hearing, including 2 weeks ago, where I stood with hundreds of residents until the bitter end of the hearing at 1:20 a.m. I will continue to advocate and negotiate to deliver a true first-class train hub, which this project has nothing to do with. I've been called a troublemaker. Yes, I believe in good trouble, to borrow from John Lewis. My roots are in organizing our community, reaching out, listening, speaking up, finding solutions. Sometimes we need to make a bit of noise to get what we need, and I'm not afraid of that. I also get along. I've worked tirelessly for a decade and a half with our elected officials. I've developed strong relationships with good government and civic groups, because I know that the only way is together. Our constituents have my number and they call me because they know I'll listen. I'll work on their behalf. That's who I am. I show up, I listen, and I get to work. And once in Albany, I'll do exactly that so that you know your voice will be heard. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Layla. Okay, now your answers will be no more than 2 minutes each. I want you to listen to the questions because I will be jumping around on each round. I will not be going in order, but every person will be called because I made a sheet to make sure that every person is called and I don't leave anybody out. So let's get started. 1/3 of New York City's voting age citizens live in low-income households. Poor people feel inflation more than others, and low-income groups are more exposed to housing inflation because they are renters. So this evening, we're going to start off talking about housing, and we're going to focus on some of the major concerns. The pandemic has had a disproportionate impact on communities of color, and most of New York City public housing developments are among the most vulnerable communities, with a city-wide population estimated at between 400,000 and 600,000 residents that are mostly all Black and Latino, who face deplorable conditions both before and after the pandemic, which is basically still going on. A recently noted survey found that 1 in 4 low-income tenants are behind on their rent, with Black and Latino women at the highest risk for eviction. If you're elected to the assembly as our member, when people call your office, what steps would you advise tenants facing eviction to take to protect their interests? And we'll start with Amber.
Good evening, Sylvia. This is a really relevant question because this is happening right now in our neighborhood. This is something that started before COVID and has been exacerbated by the pandemic. I think that one thing that we not have taken granted for, but we've always had, is we've had an advocate in Dick Godfrey. His office is here in the community. It's a place that not only people could call, but they could actually walk in and they can sit down and they could talk to somebody and they can go through their story in detail. And when we have that connection with people and we can sit with them, we can partner with them on what they need to do. We cannot expect to just provide information and resources and expect people to be able to navigate through this process by themselves. There's got to be a partnership with the people in this community. One of the things that we need to do is we need to change a lot of the formulas right now that are applied to, affordable housing to get out of this problem that we're in. We need to get rid of the AMI formula. It has to be eliminated completely. We need to, get rid of the 421A program, not just revamp it, but completely replace it. And we need more affordable housing that's permanently affordable. I think if we put these protections in place, we can start to make a dent in some of the crisis that people are living with. My emphasis, I know a lot of people talk about building affordable housing. My emphasis is really on how do we take the housing stock that we have and make it truly affordable, not an AMI-based system, but truly affordable housing. One of the things that we do at Penn South is we provide a contact for people who can reach out to us before they're in that place of crisis, before they, are missing a payment. And when I talk about partnership, these are people we develop a partnership with. So they don't have that anxiety and that stress and that depression that comes with this sense of not knowing where they may be living in 3 or 6 months.
Thank you, Amber. Thank you. Low-income housing today in the 75th for the poor requires trade-offs. In many instances, if you can pay your rent, you can't afford a bus or a subway fare. 23% go hungry. 18% cannot pay their utility and other bills, so rental assistance is favored. As our representative, what would you do to put an end to the trade-offs that low-income residents have to make on a daily basis, Tony?
Thank you for that question. I will do the same thing I've done my entire career in city and state government. I stood with Mike McKee to save tenant rent protections. It is a shame that good cause eviction lapsed in the middle of the winter for so many tenants, so many of our friends in Chelsea and Hell's Kitchen. We need to look at that and pass it permanently. We need to reinstate it. We have to also work, as I always work, in a collective action. Look, my mom was an immigrant from Peru. When she came here, she also had housing issues and discrimination issues. And she always taught me the importance of how noble public service is, that you can never do anything alone. When I worked for Christine Quinn in the city council, and when I advocated for not just immigrant rights and tenant rights, I always listened very closely. When a tenant called our office, we always tried to figure out how is the quickest way we can help them. When it comes to the cost of living in this city, the theme of my campaign is to make it a more livable, healthier, and equitable district and city and state for all. So I would look at creative new solutions. Amber's right, and others. We need to look at the housing stock we have. We also need to look and work with, I have a very large network of folks from the nonprofit sector, the private sector, on how you actually help the poorest tenants. Look what happened with the RAD plan. Dick Gottfried and community-led involvement and leadership did a much better job at providing for NYCHA tenants in Chelsea Elliott and Fulton houses, repairs that are long needed. No fellow New Yorker should go without heat or terrible conditions that we have right now in NYCHA. They work together. That's what I did my entire career, and had a community-led initiative to help tenants. And now it was a much better result, that they can fire the private management if it doesn't work out. Not everyone agreed with the process, because rightly so, the fear of being privatized.
Wrap
So
it
we
up,
have to
Tony.
train
Thank you. Thank
converting
you.
hotels and other storefronts for
Thank
housing.
you.
Too. Thank you for the question.
Thank
for
you.
the question.
Time is up. Stronger oversight of NYCHA management is necessary. Secondly, a bill is needed that requires annual funding for operating and capital expenses, as well as resident management expenses. Right now, there are several bills in the New York State legislature to correct some of the evils that presently exist in NYCHA housing. Bill A1866, a bill sponsored, among others, by Assemblyman Dick Gottfried, would create the NYCHA Utility Accountability Act. This act requires NYCHA to provide a rent reduction to tenants who experience a disruption in their utility service. What is your opinion about this bill, and what strategy would you use to garner the support of other Assembly members? Layla Lord Jazico.
Hi, thank you so much for this question. This is really key, Capital expenditures for NYCHA is a disaster. We evaluate that NYCHA properties, in New York City, owe $40 billion worth of capital expenditures. We haven't maintained these properties for way too long. And, it is both a city problem, but it is also a state problem. And the way it plays out is that the state basically needs to go and get the federal funding, because the NYCHA is funded by federal dollars, as well as city dollars, but the vast majority of the funding is coming from the federal government. So we need the state to do their work. What we also need to do is that the state involvement financially is not meaningful enough. So we need the state budget to allocate more funding to NYCHA. As all the candidates have stated, housing is really a human right. Housing insecurity is just intolerable. And, on this specific bill, I think it's wonderful. It is great that there would be a rent reduction when a tenant is experiencing lack of service. But the reality is that we need this lack of service not to happen, period. Heat needs to function, boilers need to run, roofs need to be, leak-proof. This is the level of standard that we have to expect. This is the expectation that we need to have for all NYCHA residents. And we need to keep it public. And although the RAD program may be appealing because we get things done for the moment, it would give a big leverage to the private sector to actually disengage from maintenance in NYCHA, which for the residents of NYCHA is not desirable. So, I think this bill is a good first step, but we cannot ignore the forest just looking at the tree. We need to really tackle this need in capital dollars, 40 billion. This is what we need to bring. And in the assembly, I will make sure that there is an appropriation in the budget so that we get that done.
Thank
And we
you.
will work with the federal partners on that as well. Thank you for the question.
Thank you, Leila. Along the same lines, to improve the quality of life in NYCHA buildings, a bill in the Assembly is pending which requires the New York City Housing Authority to provide adequate and reliable internet service for all Housing Authority residents. Same question. One of the few times I'm going to ask the same question. What is your opinion, Chris, about the bill, and what strategy would you use to garner the support of other Assembly members, especially those in other parts of the state?
Thank you so much for that question. I appreciate it so very, very much. I think that, one, the internet is a utility, it's not a luxury. Anything that we've learned from this pandemic with at-home schooling is that the internet companies, the internet service providers that we have are not fulfilling their end of the deal. Our children are suffering. Parents are struggling to make sure that their kids, as they return to in-person, are hurting. This is a sound bill, and I've actually worked on something very similar to this in City Council. There was a project proposed where signals from public internet, likely connected through Links NYC and Google, would actually ping 5G throughout NYCHA facilities and NYCHA campuses is what I like to call them. It did not go very far because the pandemic hit almost immediately thereafter. But at the end of the day, what we need to do between Buffalo and Rochester and in the downstate areas where we have Section 9 housing, which is NYCHA, we need to ensure that the Black, Latino, and Asian caucus are completely supported, that representatives in the Assembly and the State Senate that have high volumes and concentrations of Mechalamas and Section 9 housing are attended to, that we come together statewide, and that if I'm an Assembly member for the 75th, attend SOMOS and attend the Black and Latino Asian caucuses that occur in Albany. I'm Latino. I'm fortunate to be in rent-stabilized housing, but some of my family members aren't. I need to be an ally, and we all need to be an ally. So first, I'm going to listen, and then I'm going to ask, what is it that we can do to ensure that internet service is provided as a utility and not as a luxury as it is now? Thank you.
Thank you, Chris. Of the 84,000 NYCHA households who have experienced permanent or temporary household employment income loss due to the pandemic, 20,000 households, or 24%, have already fallen behind on their rent, had already fallen behind on their rent by August of 2020. Another 28,000 households, or 34%, fell behind in the next couple of months for a total, back in the year 2020, of 58% who faced serious rent problems. Moreover, the impact was also more severe for those who resided in regulated apartments, believe it or not, than unregulated. Question: as the moratorium on rent has lifted, catastrophic debt will increase. Adverse conditions will continue along the lines of accumulating rent, debt, looming evictions, potential displacement of residents, and homelessness. What is your opinion, if any, about the concept of instituting rent concessions in the form of rent adjustment and rent deferrals? And in what section of residential applicants should these principles apply, such as subsidized housing and rent-regulated tenants? Leila.
Thank you so much, Sylvia. This is also a great question. Listen, rent protection is absolutely essential. I was actually personally really shocked that, the moratorium on eviction was led to expire. It actually expired on the coldest day in January. This is it's cruel. It is really cruel. What must happen? The register must reopen, which I think it has, so that people who are applying for state funding and state help on their rents can get the protection. Because if they are registered in the database, then they have 1 year where they are basically protected against eviction. We need to work better on resolving the backlog. There is currently $220 million of funds for rental assistance that have not been disbursed. Why? Because this particular section requires for the landlords to sign the application alongside the tenant. And the landlords at times, for whatever reason, don't do it. So we need to make sure that these programs are worked efficiently and, with providing the actual result that they need to provide. As an assembly member, I would help the constituents to actually navigate this complicated system, making sure that their landlord signs the paper, making sure that the state agency has received the application, making sure that there are no disconnects, so that these tenants receive the assistance, the support, and the protection that they need. And then will they receive rental assistance? Maybe, but in the meantime, they're going to be protected against an eviction. And then as a legislator, once again, we need to actively work so that the federal funding is being brought to New York. And maybe we need to get the money from another state. Maybe another state doesn't need this money as much as New York needs. Thank you.
Thank you. Many New Yorkers in the city's shelters system have been staying in formerly private hotels, a need that was brought on by the pandemic. Some of those housed in the hotels noted that the dignity of having a clean bed and a shower of their own meant they could spend time improving their health and going to school. But with the reversal in the need to find housing with vouchers, the homeless are faced with their former fears. The city's voucher is $1,200 a month, and you cannot sublet. How can one afford an apartment for $1,200 a month? Tony, as our assemblyman, what would you propose in Albany to fix this situation?
Well, first of all, we have plenty of wealth in this city and state. We should have a fund for tenants, no matter what happens to tenants. I've done that throughout my career in city and state government, working with the private sector, the public sector, and advocates to ensure that tenants are protected. We need a more livable district, a more equitable district for all New Yorkers. We have to be creative. Look, no New Yorker should sleep on the streets. No New Yorker. They're human beings. We have to be creative and come together in a room like we did when we worked to defeat the West Side Stadium, when we passed marriage equality, from all incomes together in one room and just come up with these solutions, talk to mental health experts. We have to make sure that we have funding for outreach workers for the homeless. We also have to make sure that we have actual supportive housing, not just in one district, but throughout our city and state, to ensure that not one district is the only one that has supportive housing. We need real housing, real middle-class housing. We need to be creative. We need to look at some of the plans proposed now in the state legislature and by the governor about converting hotels or storefronts to housing. There is no reason why my friends who are artists should be priced out of Chelsea and Hell's Kitchen. There's no rationale in the greatest city in the world why my friends who are firefighters and single moms have to commute. Part of our campaign is to work together collectively to find both solutions. Work-life balance for the poorest. They should be able to work from home and have an office, but we should not force folks to commute far. People should be able to live and work in the same district. I hope that as we continue this campaign, that we not only come up with great ideas, no one person has the answer, no one person has a solution. Everything we've solved and we will solve, including the homeless issue and the issue of being priced out of our district, will only be solved if we all work together. And I hope we can do that.
Thank you, Joni. While the number of people residing in shelters has decreased with the hotels being opened up during the pandemic to the homeless,
The light
advocates.
is going out.
Excuse me? I'll continue, I'll start again. While the number of people residing in shelters have decreased, with the hotels being opened up during the pandemic to the homeless, advocates believe that the number of people living in the city shelters is likely to go up with the expiration of the eviction moratorium. With landlord-tenant courts overloaded and evictions on the rise, what ideas do you have to stem the possible rise of individuals and families returning to shelters? Chris Lebron.
Thank you. This is an important question because it hits home. A few years ago, I reached out to my cousin and I wanted to send her a Christmas card. She has 2 daughters. Came to find out that she was in a women's shelter for families. These things happen. We're always a step away from a cataclysmic event where we could be homeless. And it's an uncomfortable thought to deal with, but it's just true. As I joined New York City Communities for Change yesterday and the Met Council yesterday, calling for the passage of good cause eviction, we also were asking for an expansion of the eviction moratorium. Unfortunately, that's not going to happen. I believe ERAP is an absolute failure, though I will continue calling on my neighbors and friends to apply for it, even if they don't know if they qualify. How to prevent people from entering shelters is a matter of working 24 hours a day, 365 days a week to ensure that good policies in place with housing advocates to stop those families from going either to hotels that currently house them with social services or preventing them from getting evicted from NYCHA, which their rent rules have changed over the decades. And that's going to necessitate coalition building and allyship. As a freshman assembly member, I would say it's very difficult to get anything done without a fair partnership. And when I look at the problems that are happening with these eviction numbers, they're happening in Spanish Harlem and Central Harlem, the Bronx, Central Brooklyn, Southeast Queens. Those are the elected officials that we need to go to. And those are the advocates in those areas that we need to go to get the answers to ensure that people are not on the street and people are not returning to shelter. Thank you.
Thank you. While many landlords have had the ability to weather the storm of the pandemic, at the same time, many landlords with only a few properties have suffered because they lacked a steady income and had to face their own financial pressures. While New York still provides strong tenant protections, including the representation in housing court for New York City tenants, what can be done to help the landlords on a small level who are suffering financial loss? Amber.
I think we have something in place that would be really effective, but it has to be continued, which is the rent relief. And somebody mentioned it earlier that the landlord has to be a participant in that program. So it helps not only the tenant be stabilized, but it helps the landlord be able to stabilize the building. So in a continuation, I bet we have about $200 million that's left in the fund, and I'm hoping that they'll continue it throughout the pandemic. There's a number of things that can be done right now. I just worked on legislation to extend the J51. These are tax incentive and tax breaks that landlords get for improving their building. So, you know, a lot of landlords that said that they had too much turnover to be able to address some of the capital needs in their buildings. Now's the time for them to do that. They can get the incentive and then they can get the additional rent relief that's in place. And that should get our landlords temporarily through COVID. I do think that we need to really analyze and talk about affordable housing on a very large scale. And I think that we need to be incentivizing and making sure that every single landlord in New York City, that a certain percentage of those units are all permanently affordable. We need to develop a strong, permanently affordable program that works with the city and the state, and that landlords can participate in and be a part of, and they'll get the stabilization that they say that they need right now. And then we'll have guaranteed homes for those families.
Thank you very much. Presently, the law mandates that 85% mandates an 85% cut in greenhouse gas emissions by 2050 and reduction in carbon, meaning that the state will have to electrify to mitigate the climate change. What would you propose in Albany in order for the state to continue to meet its emission reduction requirements? Tony.
There's no doubt that we have a climate crisis. I know, we all know this. When I worked at the city council, Sandy hit, and I worked collectively with the private sector, volunteers, many folks on the Zoom, and many folks throughout the district to respond to, unfortunately, as always, very poor communities of color were affected the most by the climate crisis. If we put all our work together, we need to come up with a collective action, bold solutions to ensure that there's legislation passed for retrofitting buildings, to ensuring we pass the community climate crisis. I'm getting the act wrong now. The Climate Community Investment Act. There I go. To make sure that we invest in fighting climate change. We have to have more green buildings. We did that when we worked at the city council. I helped work on that with so many others, not alone, in a team. There's no doubt that we can have a legislative solution, but we should work from the inside and out as we've done in the past. We need to find other ways. We're almost late to this. It's clear from Sandy and what's happening around the nation and the world that we're playing catch up. We need to reduce pollution. Congestion pricing should be implemented yesterday. We need to reduce traffic. I live on 37th and 10th, and I look out my window. It's dangerous for our kids, my neighbors' kids. Climate crisis is here. We can do it with legislation by passing CCIA, by working with advocates and other creative solutions to retrofit, new construction or retrofitting buildings that exist now to fight carbon emissions. We can do it in a practical matter, in a legislative matter, and we can work together to solve this problem. I know if we have the will, we can fight climate crisis starting in our district. We have already started, but we haven't done enough.
Thank you. What do you see as the most dangerous environmental condition that continues to exist today that requires the passage of a law? Layla.
That's a great question. It's, I would say the most dangerous environmental condition is multiple, climate change. Climate change is bringing just so much destruction. We have, a permanent revolving door of hurricanes that are wreaking havoc. What are they doing? They're destroying our tunnels. They are flooding basements and killing people. So what do we need to do? We need to lower carbon emissions. This is absolutely critical. How do we do that? Well, together, of course, with a variety of industries. Construction industry, it is actually much more efficient to retrofit a building than to build a new one. Putting existing buildings in the dumpster is a very bad idea. We need to reduce congestion. We need to reduce traffic. We need to get people out of their cars. So we need to invest in our public transportation infrastructure. We also need to decarbonate our electric grid. We need this electricity to be produced with clean energy. So, you know, it is, the problem is massive. The solutions are multiple. We need to partner with the auto industry. We need to partner with the construction industry. We need to bring more stringent regulations. And we also need to work from the ground up. We need to work with all these advocates, these wonderful advocates, and you know there are numerous in our district. We're very fortunate to work, you know, from the ground up on addressing those very pressing needs. But I would say that you know getting the cars off our streets is really a priority, and stabilizing our stock of housing, so that we stop this glut of construction and rather try to stabilize and retrofit our existing buildings, because the greenest building is a building that is already built.
Thank you. What challenges, excuse me, what is the greatest issue that you see with respect to the problems in our education system here in the 75th? And what do you feel Albany can do to create full funding in the district? Chris.
Thank you for that question. I have a cousin who is a guidance counselor at the Bayard Rustin campus in Chelsea. I attended 111-51 High School for Environmental Studies. Being a public school student at PS 111 was a stark contrast from my friends who attended PS 11. I got to meet them later on at Wagner Middle School. One of the greatest fallacies, or rather greatest issues that we have, is consistency in the amount of funds that we're putting into our school systems right now. Legislatively speaking, I think this is something that has to be codified. New York City needs money to support social services, a social worker in every for every school at least. We need to ensure that there are ratios for guidance counselors appropriately, that there are appropriate class ratios. Additionally, we need to make sure that every student has a guaranteed number put to their education from 3K all the way to their senior year of high school. We're not doing that right now. And because we're not doing that, we see PTAs fighting against each other. We see families moving about in New York City, trying to get the best education. And ultimately, that hurts not just the 75th, but the 67th as well. So what I'm proposing is legislation that guarantees money year over year, and for each student, and legislation that says every student in New York State, not just in New York City, is required to have a social worker present for them. I think it's a financial issue that is yet to be solved, but I'm willing to work with education advocates to make sure that that math makes sense at the end of the day, so that way our children aren't cheated. Thank you.
Thank you. Nearly 1 in 10 New York City public school students were homeless during the last school year, a staggering rate that has barely budged for several years. About 101,000 students lived in unstable or temporary housing in the 2020 to 21 school year, as released by Advocates for Children, a larger number of children than in the entire school district of Denver. What challenges do these children face as barriers to their learning? And what can be done to improve the quality of their education? Amber.
This is a really difficult, question. We have a kid in PS 11 in public school, and was a class volunteer there for 3 years. And one of my duties was to deal with the challenges that students who are homeless had in this school. So there's a perception that if you go to a certain school that this doesn't impact you, but that's actually not true. My daughter had 3 students in 3rd grade that were homeless. My responsibility first and foremost was to make sure that each one of those kids was eating breakfast in school every day, because a lot of these kids are coming into school and they don't have adequate nutrition and they're unable to learn from the moment they come into that building. We were lucky enough to work with a school that had developed internally a program independent from the DOE on how to address the immediate needs of these children. We had a clothing exchange set up for them. We had a meal program set up for them. And then we had assistants so that they could do the work in the classroom, because they're not living in places where this is a possibility for them. They don't have access to computers. They often don't have access to being able to do homework in a quiet place or a safe place. So one of the things about working throughout the district and being part of the community board and working with all the different principals is that each one of these principals was saying that their needs for addressing this particular crisis were different. And we need to be able to support each of those principals to develop an individualized program that is going to match with their student body. Too often, and I know they're well-meaning people who are in legislation, want to create laws or bills across the board they think are going to impact the most amount of people. But this is one of those situations that's so unique. It's about giving autonomy to those individuals.
Okay, thank you, Amber. Thank you. New York City and perhaps other areas of the state are experiencing exploitive tax lien sales. New York State Attorney General Tish James and other members of the City Council are partners to abolish the New York City Tax Lien Sale Coalition, a practice begun in the Giuliani era that saddles low-income homeowners with usurious fees and fuels speculation in the housing market. That the practice is particularly harmful to Black and Latino families. The Coalition for Affordable Homes has indicated that an analysis of 1 to 3 unit home data showed that the city was 6 times more likely to sell a lien in majority Black neighborhoods and 2 times more likely to sell a lien in Latino neighborhoods as compared to majority white neighborhoods. Now you reside, Amber, in the Penn South area, which has its own independent system of housing with its own set of contained services, which perhaps does not experience this tax lien exploitation. Still, how do you intend to handle such an exploitive system for your constituents should you become our next assemblywoman?
I would address it immediately. I think you know, we can all identify that this is a completely this is an unequal system. And there's a lot of examples of it. And this is certainly one of those. When we talked about, developing a partnership with the community, this is one of those areas that would be absolutely necessary. We need to first have an opportunity for people who are being impacted by this to work and partner with somebody who can help lead them through the process that they need to get out of it. This is, I don't know if the intent is to target particular groups, but that is certainly the impact of it. And we need to deal with this. It's a crisis, and more people in the community are being impacted by it. And we need to work not only a city level, but a state level in order to get the kind of movement and weight behind it that we're going to need, because the amount of people who are impacted, the numbers are phenomenal. So I would do that on a legislative level.
Thank you. The eviction moratorium dated January 15th, 2022, I believe is over. But per the most recent household pulse survey taken on August 30th, 2021, 53% of New Yorkers making less than 100,000 a year were not highly confident that they could pay their next month's rent. And 39% of New York renter households are at risk of eviction in the next 2 months. Rents have been rising rapidly in 2021 and at a rate of 9.4% nationwide. In July of 2021, on the local level, the city of Albany passed a good cause eviction bill. A bill also passed in Hudson, New York, and another is being debated in New Paltz, Kingston, Ulster County, Poughkeepsie, Ithaca, all on good cause eviction. Unfortunately, my research shows that the state's Erstat law prevents New York City from establishing a good cause eviction protection without state authorization, but no other municipality is subject to this rule. As our assembly member, what do you propose to correct the situation? Tony?
Well, first off, good cause eviction needs to be passed. The moratorium needs to be implemented. You know, when I worked at the city council, we worked with Mike McKee and Tenant PAC and different to make sure that deregulation didn't happen to save the tenants. We fought in the West Village when they tried to go after Westbeth. I would do the same thing I did my entire career, work in coalitions to ensure from the outside of government that we protect tenants, but also from the inside. My relationships with folks in the governor's office are extensive with other elected officials. I've always been one, I learned from my grandfather, union delegate. You get nothing done alone. You need collective action to solve many of these complex problems. We have to be creative. We need more actual middle income housing. Look, in Hell's Kitchen, I know friends who applied for housing. They've been on the lottery forever. And then they find out that a lot of the units are empty in different complexes in Hell's Kitchen because it's so stringent, the city requirements, that someone makes too little to have the housing, and then all of a sudden too much, and they get a favor and they get a apartment that someone else really should have. We need more increasing the AMI for affordable housing. We have to be creative in converting storefronts, hotels. There's no reason why in the greatest city in the world on the west side, we can't live and work in the same district. I think we have to work together with this community board like we've done in the past. When there was a terrible issues on the west side, when it came to conversions, you know, a lot of us stood together against illegal hotels. Like Chris had said before, we can't take away the housing stock. We have to also work and push developers like at Penn Station to actually increase affordable housing. It cannot be simply peanuts and to get these high rises for density, and we have luxury housing.
Thank you, Tony. What ideas for pro and against good cause eviction do you maintain, given the fact that many New Yorkers already maintain some form of protection? I'll read that again. What view do you hold, pro or against good cause eviction, given the fact that many New Yorkers already maintain some form of protection already? Chris Lebron.
Thank you. Once again, I was really filled with warmth being with New York City, or rather New York Community for Change, ABNY, the Met Council, West Side Neighborhood Alliance, and HCC yesterday, calling on Kathy Hochul to pass good cause eviction. Pro, my neighbors who are currently market renters that are under the rent stabilized market because they're brand new, they received a reduction in rent to move into our buildings, are now receiving emails saying that their rent's going up. They're afraid to ask for heat. That's inappropriate. You should be at base level, protected. When you're not receiving heat, when you're not receiving hot water or clean water, when your hallways are not clean, when you need basic repairs. You should be able to call up your manager. You should be able to call up your super. And you should say, please fix this. I pay my bills on time. Additionally, if you are a tenant that is paying their rent on time, there should be no reason for a landlord to say, you know what? I have no interest in renting to you anymore. I want to use this apartment for my own personal enjoyment. Multi-family buildings are the core of Midtown. We need to pass good cause eviction because we're suffering from a population collapse. We need to pass good cause eviction because millennials and Zoomers are working poor. It's inappropriate that we have to handle debt and a necessity to put a roof over our head. Thank you.
Thank you. Unfair medical bills and hidden fees are items that usually affect more seriously senior citizens, and health inequality and the homeless are major issues that the state is facing. The Hippocratic oath taken by physicians for centuries always includes some aspect of do no harm, yet nonprofit hospitals or charities are filing liens on patients' homes, and this jeopardizes both the physical and fiscal health of clients. Historically, in just 2 years, 2017 and 2018, 56 hospitals imposed 4,880 liens on the homes of their patients for outstanding medical bills, while collecting over $442 million in state funds through the Indigent Care Pool to support the provision of uncompensated care. Between 2015 and 2020, over 52,000 New Yorkers were sued by hospitals, all of which were nonprofit charities. The New York Times wrote a story that convinced Northwell Health to stop suing patients during the pandemic and rescind 2,500 lawsuits that it had already started. To make matters worse, they were allowed to charge 9% interest on medical debt judgments. We presently have two outstanding bills, A6474 and S5724, that's an Assembly and a Senate bill, right now that would prevent already unaffordable medical bills from increasing through high interest rates, capping the interest rate at 2%. What is your position with respect to these bills presently pending in the legislature? And what else, if anything, would you do to address the problem of citizens being sued by nonprofit hospitals, especially in the light of the fact that the pandemic has hit New York so catastrophically? Layla.
Thank you so much, Sylvia. This is such an important issue. No one should feel threatened to go and see the doctor because they are afraid of the bill they're going to receive and that they would not be able to pay this bill. So to answer your question specifically about these bills that are pending in the Assembly and the Senate, it's a great first step. Capping at 2% interest on medical bills is great. But for residents of New York, this is not enough. And here is what I propose we should do. We should actually make it illegal to actually go into medical bankruptcy. So there should be a system of forgiveness for medical bills when our neighbors are unable to pay them. And we already know that this fund exists at the state level. And hospitals, which as you underscored, many of them are non-for-profits, they need this revenue. We certainly understand that, we appreciate that. And we want these hospitals to continue to be able to provide the services that they are providing. But the state needs to step in so that individuals who are unable to pay these bills are not at risk of losing their livelihood, their homes. I mean, I have friends who have gone through this, and this is just a nightmare. When you're hit with, serious pathology, cancer, long-term care for diabetes, these bills can be absolutely astounding. And we need to make sure our neighbors receive the medical care that they need, regardless of their ability to pay. So there has to be a debt forgiveness for medical care, and there has to be it must be illegal to actually go into medical bankruptcy. And
Thank
those
you.
bills need to be introduced. Thank you.
Thank you. States have laws that prevent hospitals and other creditors from securing liens against one's primary residence. New York State has long had a pending bill, 7363 in the Assembly and in the Senate 6522, to protect patients' homes from aggressive medical debt collection, but it hasn't been passed yet. What do you feel has been holding up the bill, which has bicameral endorsements, from passing? And what would you do to increase the possibility that this bill gets passed? Tony.
I mean, there's no question we have to protect New Yorkers against healthcare debt. First of all, I have much faith that Dick Gottfried can get it done past the Healthcare Act. We need healthcare for all, an affordable, single-payer healthcare system. Should not be based on profit. I have a close friend who had to go into debt, had to go through all this drama to get his father, who had passed away, and pay his bills, and could barely afford it. Legislation should be passed in Albany beyond just the Healthcare Act to protect folks. No, healthcare is a human right. There is no reason why anyone's livelihood should be affected because they're sick or ill. We should learn from this economic and health crisis and do it a different approach. We need to work with the hospital system and ensure that they don't go after patients. If we have to fight and advocate by rallying against the hospitals or by passing legislation. During the foreclosure crisis, when I worked in the city council, we pushed to ensure that we gave the information to tenants on how to protect themselves as banks were going after them, the same way we need to protect folks in the healthcare system. Healthcare is a human right. First, we need to pass the Healthcare Act in Albany. If it doesn't get done, we will make it happen. If I'm your assembly member, with everyone collectively to ensure that healthcare is a human right and folks do not have to worry about their livelihood when they get sick or have a dying relative.
Thank you. In a 2019 survey, 62% of New Yorkers, 52% of those surveyed, alleged having trouble paying for their health care, with the pandemic-related job loss also leading to loss of health care coverage. What is your position for or against universal health coverage, which would create one public health program that covers all New Yorkers regardless of income or immigration status? Chris Lebron.
Wow. That's a lot to take in.
Would you like me to repeat it?
Please, I caught the back end and catch the front end again. Thank you so much.
In a 2019 survey of New Yorkers, 52% of those surveyed alleged having trouble paying for their health care. With the pandemic-related job loss and leading to loss of health coverage, what is your position for or against universal health coverage, which would create one public health system that covers all New York residents, regardless of income or immigration status?
Thank you for that question. I appreciate you repeating it again. One, I am for universal health care. There are those in our party who argue that universal health care would bankrupt the state. But as a former freelancer, I can tell you firsthand, I've had to choose between medical care and taking care of Sally Mae bills, or taking care of my rent, or taking care of just the grocery bills. I believe it's essential that we recognize all New Yorkers as residents of the state. When I look at communities like Jackson Heights, Queens, or Elmhurst, Queens, when I work with organizations like Los Deliveristas, it's incredibly important that you go to work knowing that you are covered, point blank and period. And it's incredibly important that if your job is in doubt because of furlough, that you're not afraid to continue going to your primary care physician. In fact, having a primary care physician is a luxury for my generation. It's absolutely insane how many times I've spoken to my friends when they've come to me and said, where should I go? And usually they ask me because one of my first jobs as a teenager was working for Dr. Paul Curtis Bellman down in the Village. So I was still able to maintain a network of doctors that are still practicing that can help them out. Urgent care is not the answer. We absolutely need to ensure that this bill is passed. I hope the assembly member can do it now, but if he can't, then we need to work with those who are affected. We need to work with the Progressive Caucus in both the Assembly and in the State Senate to push this forward, to work with unions that are pushing back on it right now, to say, I understand your collective bargaining rights. I understand that you have fought for this healthcare, but there are so many who are healthcare in doubt. And the collective health of the state is the highest priority for all of us. We've learned that in this pandemic. Thank you.
Thank you. Many patients should not be surprised by healthcare costs that are not always covered by their insurance. An Assembly Bill 3470 and a Senate Bill 2521 would require notifying patients ahead of time if the provider adds facility fees to bills and prohibits providers from charging facility fills that insurers will not pay. What other abuses in the medical health system require addressing that you would focus on if elected to the Assembly? Layla.
Yeah, thank you, Sylvia. Another really important point. You know, when you go to the doctor, the reality is that you don't know how much they are going to charge your insurance when you're fortunate to have insurance. And it kind of depends what kind of insurance you have. And there's a great deal of murkiness. So you go to the doctor, it's a necessity. They need to run a number of tests. You come out and then you go into angst, you know, hoping that the insurance is going to cover. And at times they don't. And then the doctor goes back to you and says, okay, this is the bill. There needs to be transparency ahead of time. When you're going to the doctor, when you need a procedure, you should know how much it is going to cost. It should be the same price for all patients, and there should be a disclosure of this. So the facility fee that is charged is something that should be eliminated. But furthermore, I think it is really important that, you know, throughout the board in the medical community, there is a unified standard of cost. The same holds true for pharmaceuticals. Medicine, drugs are of various costs to various patients based on their various insurance plans. And this is not the way it's not acceptable. Tying back to the universal health care, I think that one of the great strength would be this collective bargaining. You know, all of a sudden, if the state is able to pull its weight, then it could negotiate with the pharmaceutical industry so that we could regulate and stabilize the price, the cost of drugs, and possibly subsidize it if need be for the very expensive treatments. So, I think that it is very important that we bring transparency in the way billing is being done in the medical care.
Thank you. Sadly, we have created a whole new category of newly, downwardly mobile folks who have lost their jobs and don't have any means. Working people such as your cooks, your chefs, cab drivers, all kinds of people who have fallen behind for the first time in their lives and are now facing the abyss and have never been in housing court, causing a new way of living for family homelessness. Recently, the Emergency Rental Assistance Program money, a $2.4 billion fund using federal funds, ran out. The governor opened a new portal asking the government to give an immediate infusion of emergency rental funds, but also warned that there is no guarantee that applicants will get the money. People who receive a boost from the Emergency Rental Assistance Program, the renters who apply for the funds, receive a 1-year stay of eviction proceedings against them, regardless of the funds received. With 189,565 residential non-payment cases currently pending in the courts in the 5 boroughs, what do you feel can be done to assist these individuals, as they may all not obtain funds from the Emergency Assistance Program? Amber.
This is a backlog issue, and we deal with this in every bureaucracy, but I feel like I hear time and time again, when it's people who are most in crisis, there seems to be the least amount of resources that are allocated to get them out of that particular situation. And I think that has a lot to do with not having as much ability for self-advocacy. So now that we've identified it, which is the first part of the problem, putting something in place that's got to be neighborhood-based or community-based that people can partner with. I talk a lot about partnerships. I mean, I grew up in this community in the 1980s. Everything was about partnerships. We call them coalitions now. They happen on a much greater level. But when I was young, everything was about partnerships. And there was always somebody to kind of walk you through that process. And that's why it was called a partnership. And there were small places, there were storefronts that you could go to with people that spoke multiple languages who would be able to assist you. This is a long, drawn out process. And I think, Sylvia, that there's a lot of people who start this process and then don't finish it. And so I think we have to initiate it, but then there also has to be that partnership and that follow through. We have to allocate funding, but we also have to have a better system in place to connecting people to more permanently affordable housing. The number one reason why people are homeless is because of increases in their rent. So even if we're able to stabilize people and keep them in their home because of job losses, if people are raising the rent, and that's happening now in the middle of COVID, I know people right now whose rent is being increased. It's just unimaginable. And there are a lot of people who are also going to be captured during that process. I think that we need to develop a large scale program that's standardized and developed on partnership to get people into the system and through it, because one of the reasons why we're losing them is that year-long process. There's the backlog of the court system that they have to be helped with, and then there has to be the follow through.
Thank you.
So we've allocated money to the courts in areas where we want, and we've been able to get an increase in the time. It's just getting the education and the advocacy.
Time's up. Thank you. What piece of legislature would you introduce to help the small business crisis that we are facing in the district with all these small businesses boarded up? Chris Lebron.
Thank you for that question. Early on in the pandemic, When we got out of shutdown, we were able to go about, one of the first things that I did was to take a survey of what businesses were still open and what businesses were closed. Prior to the pandemic hitting on Manhattan Community Board 4, former chair had selected me to run the Small Business Task Force that later expanded out its responsibilities to how do you save small businesses that are currently struggling, and how do you save small businesses as a whole in the 9th Avenue corridor, the 10th Avenue corridor, and the 8th Avenue corridor of the 75th. First things first, I firmly believe that we need to cap storefront rents. The 9th Avenue corridor has over 100 empty storefronts. It's absolutely depressing to see my childhood home that way. So if it cannot be done on a city level, it should be done on a state level. Rent is one of the largest factors. Additionally, the next thing is when we deal with bars and restaurants, or rather when bar and restaurant owners deal with landlords, they oftentimes have to sign on to long-term leases. This completely breaks their margins. And ultimately, it's why we see businesses fail in less than a year. So we have to end the practice of long-term commercial rent leases. We need rent leases that fit and fix a business model so that way we don't have empty storefronts. Additionally, we need to end storefront warehousing. I firmly believe in the actions of former Borough President Gail Brewer. This is one of the most important things, but if there's no action in City Council, we have to act today in Albany, because it's not just New York City that's hurting. It's Albany, it's Buffalo, it's statewide.
Thank you. Thank you. We are facing another round of bail reform, or are we? Efforts to reform New York's controversial bail laws have received an icy reception from Democrats who control the state's legislature and pressure by Republicans and New York's Mayor Eric Adams to revisit the matter. Democrats are facing an election year where voters have signaled reducing crime as a primary concern, while Republicans term the 2019 bail reform measures as a get-out-of-jail-free card for individuals who they fear are likely to commit future crimes back on the street, including violent felons. What is your position on expanding bail review? Tony.
I fully support bail reform. It is unjust that if you're wealthy or you have means, a wealthy friend, that you can get out of jail quicker than someone who is poor, who cannot afford bail. That said, I think the attacks are a red herring from conservatives who want to open bail reform and bring us back. We need to look at rehabilitation, decriminalization of right now. Let's face it, our institutions, correction institutions, are based in long time racial discrimination. So bail reform, I fully support. I don't support many of the folks who are saying that violent crimes are because of bail reform. There's been no evidence of that. There is a public safety issue, but it's not connected to bail reform. Thank you.
Thank you. There is rising crime in New York, violence, and a strong public concern for safety. Recently, we have seen 3 police officers, 2 of whom were killed, 1 seriously shot. Mayor Adams, who ran on a strong plan against crime and gun violence, has already laid out changes he'd like to see from Albany. Part of his plan includes what is known as a dangerousness standard, which allows judges to expand their discretion to determine if someone should be released on bail. What is your position with reference to amending the New York bail law to include some discretion for judges. Layla.
Yeah, thank you, Sylvia. This is a very, very important issue. Important for our district, important for the entire state. We know that there has been a rise in crime, and there's just no denying it. There has been a rise in robberies, larceny, number of petty theft, a lot of shoplifting. We know that there's actually a Rite Aid that is closing in the 50s because they have been the target of constant shoplifting. So, this kind of a crime and misdemeanor needs to be addressed by better policing, by law enforcement. But the other side of this issue is actually gun violence. And gun violence needs to be really targeted and tackled, front and center. We need to make sure that guns are out of our streets, out of our neighborhoods. And it holds true, obviously for the city of New York, but for the rest of the state. Now, specifically to answer your question on a reform to bail reform and on a discretion that judges may have, I think it is very important to understand that, the judge needs to make the determination whether an individual should be released or not. And, if this judge feels that this individual is a risk for the community, then they should use this discretion. But that doesn't put into question the fact that a bail should be paid. There should be no monetization to be released if this judge believes that this individual is not going to be a harm for his community. So there has to be, a proper evaluation by the judge, and then there has to be a support system for people who are out of jail and awaiting for their trial, so that they receive supportive services if they need it. They receive education, anything that will keep them from actually committing additional crimes if we believe that this is the path that they may take. So the issue is not really bail reform, but more of a taking a holistic view.
Thank you. Thank you. Rather than focus on bail reform, Governor Hochul has emphasized ways to tackle gun violence and trace illegal weapons. Then she signaled that she would work to seal some felony and misdemeanor criminal records and supports college tuition assistance for people in prison. On January 27th of 2022, Governor Hochul swung back again and noted in the Post that one of the most pressing issues she was going to focus on again was gun violence, especially in the wake of the recent shootings. Do you feel that it is a good idea, college tuition assistance for people in prison, when there is not enough money available for students enrolling in colleges that don't have a criminal record? Amber.
First off, we need to stop, creating these cultures of competition between people who need the most amount of resources. I mean, this is, saying that there's only so much money in the pot and it's either going to go to you or you, so that somebody always feels like they don't have the same opportunity. This is a cultural issue that we have to be on top of, and we have to change. There's no reason why we can't invest in making sure that people who are coming out of the prison system are going to make sure that they're qualified, first of all, for employment, which is what they need then to get housing, which is then what they need to be stabilized. If we don't give them this opportunity, people are coming back, they're rotating back into the community in dire need and desperation. And then we are putting them at risk of committing crimes, which is what got them into the system in the first place. So breaking this cycle, education is part of breaking this cycle. Without it, I don't see us being able to do that. I think it's absolutely necessary if we're going to have expectations for people to be reintroduced and be, productive and to be fulfilled in their lives after they've already paid the price for being in prison.
Thank you. An astounding 1 in 7 New Yorkers has a conviction history, the majority Black and Latino, reflecting decades of discriminatory policing and prosecutions, which have resulted in mass incarcerations. The clean slate legislation that is now pending in the New York State Senate and Assembly under Senate Bill 1553 and Assembly Bill 6399 may be able to change this. The clean slate will automatically seal conviction records for most jobs and housing purposes after a set period of time and allow more than 2.3 million New Yorkers the ability to move forward with their lives. Conviction records will still be visible to law enforcement, courts, prosecutors, and agencies reviewing work applications, and for vulnerable individuals and for gun applications. Question: if you win the assembly seat, what are your views about this legislation, both pro and con? Tony DeSimone.
First of all, there's no doubt that our criminal justice system is based in institutional racism. Let's just start there. Secondly, we need to look at it holistically from everyone. I mean, look at the cannabis issue and the marijuana issue. So many kids of color were put in jail while other folks got scot-free during other drug use. So we need to look at it closely. Specifically on legislation, I think we need to ensure that no one is prevented from the dignity of work because they made mistakes in their past life. We need to ensure that people are paid quality wages. I'm for a guaranteed minimum income. If there is an issue of crime, it's usually because of a terrible situation. Whether we have a mental health crisis, which we've known we've had for a long time, this pandemic has only amplified that. What we need is a more equitable and livable and healthier city and district. And I think we need to work together to figure out creative solutions. We should have a rehabilitation system, not just a punitive criminal justice system. Look, if there's violent crime, we should fight violent crime. There is no reason why anyone should feel safe to ride a subway alone. But I think when it comes to this specific question and issue, we have to ensure that we need to start rehabilitating people through our education system, through ensuring that it's not just kids of color who are being locked up for their life because of terrible circumstances, because of lack of housing or education. So I would work the same way I did in my past in city and state government with criminal justice experts, but also the communities that we live in on how to make it safer, but also how to work to ensure that you're not punished for a past mistake.
Thank you.
Forever.
Governor Hochul unveiled earlier this year her vision for a new commuter. First world-class Penn Station and revitalized surrounding neighborhood. According to the New York Post, the plan prioritizes the reconstruction of the existing station while the station expansion and gateway project initiatives, both of which the governor strongly supports, continue on their own federally established timelines. Governor Hochul's new plan allows for the expedited reconstruction of the existing Penn Station, 60% of whose users are subway and Long Island Railroad riders. While the plan calls for breathing new life into Moynihan train station, increased platform capacity by approximately 40%, there remains a great deal of controversy over the plan, some of it based on the allegations that the current plan leaves Penn Station hanging and does not allow for pass-through trains. What do you see as the pros and the cons of the Empire State Plan? Chris Lebron.
Thank you, District Leader. I've been able to sit down on a few of these presentations. Cons, eminent domain is not the solution. We cannot use Robert Moses tactics to solve Robert Moses's problems. You have to excuse me, actually. My mom and dad are staying with me and they're just coming in right now. So if you hear somebody walking in the background, multi-generational housing, such is the case. I just don't believe in eminent domain. When I read The Power Broker, we're talking about thinking of ways creatively to undo the knots of Robert Moses, and it's so terribly difficult. On CB4, we all agree that there's not enough green space. 17 acres is simply not enough. There's not enough affordable housing, and there's no guarantee that those who would be displaced can come back to their homes. Those are the cons outright, and we need to negotiate better. Secondly, I've been quoted in the New York Times in an argument to preserve the McGraw-Hill Building's iconic rooftop. I firmly believe that the buildings that are up for landmark preservation status or have been ignored for landmark preservation status can and should still be utilized. I don't think they should be destroyed. Environmentally speaking, it's more sound to build within the framework there. Pros. If we didn't have Madison Square Garden, we'd probably be better off, but we desperately need a train system that works. I firmly believe that as we negotiate what this train station looks like, we also need to review alternative modes of transportation. And we also still need to guarantee that the basic services of the MTA will be increased and we can provide confidence in our mass transit system. If we don't do this, we're not going to succeed in delivering what, in theory, this project has promised.
Thank
A
you.
cleaner Midtown. Thank you.
Thank you. In the January 31st, 2022, 2 days ago, Crane's article titled "The City Isn't on Board Yet with Hochul's Plan to Rebuild Penn Station." Leila, you are quoted as saying ESD has never approved a plan that wasn't fully supported by the city. It's never happened, never. You've also said in order for New Yorkers to become a major, for New York City, excuse me, to become a major flow-through transportation hub, similar to what exists in major European cities, Penn Station and its tracks must be reconfigured in order to accommodate trains that arrive in Penn Station and continue on to other parts of the country. Can you expand upon this statement and your views?
Yes, my pleasure. I've been hard at work for the past 2 years on this issue. So it is both a very complicated issue and a very simple issue. You basically have 3 separate plans, and the only plan that has been made public is a plan to build 10 towers. And what do 10 towers have to do with Penn Station? You wonder, roll drums, nothing, absolutely nothing. So let's go back to the drawing board and let's reshuffle the deck and let's put the deck in the correct order. Let's all focus on Penn Station. We all agree that we need to rebuild Penn Station, and we're really heartened to hear that the governor agrees that this should be the priority, except that this is not what is in front of us and this is not what the state agency is working on. So let's get the MTA to work on reconstructing Penn Station. We need to expand capacity at Penn Station. We all agree on that. How do you increase capacity? By doing through running. We do not need an expansion. An expansion would actually, it sounds counterintuitive, but an expansion would actually cause more congestion because you would have more tracks that all have to navigate and merge into a tunnel. It doesn't work. Through running is what has been practiced in Europe, in Japan, in Korea. This is a very efficient way, especially for commuter By the way, Penn Station is already through running for intercity. We know that. Why? Because trains from Amtrak go from Washington, D.C. all the way to Boston, and they stop in New York, and they go through. It's called through running. We haven't, invented anything new or, pushed for something totally revolutionary. It already exists. And we need to get the will of the agencies, MTA, New Jersey Transit, Amtrak, to come together. How do we get that? We need leadership. In the meantime, we need to focus, as I said, on what matters. And what matters is what I just explained. What does not matter is building 10 towers and demolishing 9 city blocks in a very Robert Moses way. So the whole urban renewal strategy we know is a failure. Let's focus on what really matters, transportation. Penn Station. Thank you.
During the height of the pandemic, cycling in the city increased by 33%, which means almost 1 million more people took a bicycle as a means of transportation. And while most of the people are enamored about walking over to a city bike stand and getting a bicycle, many cyclists today maintain little or no regard for A, the flow of traffic, B, speed limits, C, red lights and other forms of requirements to traffic laws. How do we force cyclists to carry the same level of respect for the vehicle and traffic laws as they apply to the motorists? Amber.
Good
you want me to
question.
repeat that?
We've got, we've been inundated with city bikes throughout Penn South. So I've spent lots of time watching and seeing the behaviors of some of the cyclists. I think that we have, in reference to what you're saying, like a few bad eggs. I think the majority of people do follow the traffic laws, but there's, always somebody who is running against the light or going too fast on the bike lane. And so we have these individuals that are causing very dangerous situations, not only for the other cyclists in the bike path, but for the pedestrians who need to cross it when they cross the street. So something absolutely has to be done. I'm not big on ticketing, but I've actually been there while we have people who are in charge of taking care of the lights, screaming at cyclists, but not ticketing them. And I think we need to give some more power to people who are there on the street when this is happening. Until there is something put in place, I think that with the increase in ridership, we're just going to see more of this behavior as it becomes more congested and more competitive, especially during the rush hours. So I think a ticketing system has to be put in place. I see them very often. It's, repeat offenders on the bicycles that are making a bad name for everybody else who's just trying to get from point A to point B. So I think if we can address them, we'll see some changes.
Thank you. Recently, Senator Alexandria Biaggi, along with Assemblywoman Jessica Gonzalez Rojas, supported a Senate Bill 9443, recently signed by Governor Hochul on December 28th, which requires the Metropolitan Transportation Authority to develop a strategic action plan to improve bicycle and pedestrian access. I'll repeat that. To develop a strategic action plan to improve bicycle and pedestrian access to 7 bridges and passenger stations. How do we solve the problem of allowing bicyclists and passenger access to the major bridges and stations when senior citizens are not often safe on the New York City streets? Chris Lebron.
Thank you for that question. Since the pandemic began, I've started biking quite a bit, nearly 1,700 miles in city bike. Their tanks and my legs have benefited from the workout. I go across our bridges weekly, even in the winter time. One bridge in particular stands out, and that's the 59th Street Bridge. It's a shared pedestrian bike access path, and former council member Ben Kalos moved along with pedestrian advocates and transportation alternatives and demanded that the south lane of the 59th Street Bridge be an access point for pedestrians. This is critical. When we built out infrastructure for bikes, we completely forgot pedestrians. And on that bridge in particular, families go by there. The 59th Street Bridge is not that far away from Ravenswood and Queensbridge houses. There are children and there are parents and grandchildren going across that bridge. The Brooklyn Bridge had a complete change over the pandemic. They took out a lane of traffic and provided a bike-only lane. And this was absolutely necessary. When I worked at City Hall, I would enjoy walks across the Brooklyn Bridge. However, doing so meant that I had to put myself in harm's way because I was just a pedestrian. And in many instances, I saw speeding bicyclists hit tourists and New Yorkers alike. I've seen some gruesome things. I am for adding infrastructure that provides safe access for pedestrians on bridges. If it means losing a lane of traffic or a partial lane of traffic to cars to put bikes on there, it's incredibly important that we give pedestrians and anybody who's visiting the city a right of access that's safe.
Thank you. The city has 1.1 million adults who are 65 or older, according to the most recent report by the New York City Department of Health and Mental Hygiene, as reported in the summer of 2021. They comprise presently 13% of the population, and around 3% live in exclusive senior development centers that are being constructed by developers who see dollar signs for higher income seniors who wish to reside in luxurious, perk-packed communities. But what about the rest of the senior citizens residing in the city who cannot afford these current high-end prices of $13,000 and $16,000 a month? If you become our next assemblyman, what ideas do you have to make our seniors' living experience more affordable in the city? Tony.
Great question. We could tell you're a litigator because these questions are really, really great. So, Sylvia, I would fight, like I always did when I was in the city council. I worked with Bobby Sackman and advocacy organizations to protect our seniors. We have to ensure that there's senior housing. We have to ensure that we work with the federal government and all levels of government to make sure there's a guaranteed income from seniors. We have to make sure Social Security is protected. Even though it's not a state legislature's role, we have to do everything in our power that our seniors have a great standard of living in this district. Seniors should be able to stay in the district where they were born and raised. We should fight for more supportive, affordable housing. We should ensure that our senior centers are well maintained. We have to look at creative solutions, work with coalitions to make sure that if a developer is developing a new high rise or another building, a low rise or whatever, that there's a component for seniors to live. You know, I've worked in the past with SAGE for LGBT seniors. There's no reason why someone who grew up on the west side of Manhattan has to move to the Rockaways simply now because they're older and their income has fallen. They should deserve to stay on the west side and live among us. We should look also at other solutions on senior income, a guaranteed income for seniors if Social Security doesn't cover their expenses. My parents are living on barely Social Security, and in Oregon, they have programs for seniors like SCREE and other programs they can apply to As like New York, we have to look at other progressive solutions to ensure our seniors live a great life in the end. There were teachers, there are our grandparents, that they should live in the West Side safely and live a great life, the standard of living they had the entire time they've lived on the West Side.
Thank you. Currently pending in Albany is an assembly bill referred to the Real Property Committee and a Senate bill, a bill to amend the real property tax law in relation to implementing automatic enrollment for the tax abatement program for rent-controlled and rent-regulated property occupied by senior citizens, that would be SCREE, who do not want to divulge their present information. I'll repeat that. Currently pending in Albany is an assembly bill, which has been referred to the Real Property Committee, and a Senate bill, a bill to amend the real property tax law in relation to implementing automatic enrollment for the tax abatement program for rent-controlled and rent-regulated property occupied by senior citizens who do not want to divulge their private information and could opt out. What are your views about the program and not having to divulge your personal financial information? And would you back such a bill in order to protect seniors residing in rent-regulated buildings? Layla.
Thank you, Sylvia. It's a thorny issue. So maybe for those who okay. So basically, the core of the question is, do you keep the rent stabilized status without divulging what your income is? And it has been a source of discussion and conversation since these programs were created. I think that if you are going to make the case that you deserve to be in a rent stabilized and rent controlled type of housing, you need to provide some form of disclosure. I think that it's good governance to do so. I think that transparency at that level will ensure that those who occupy these units are indeed meritorious of that. So I think that it is at the core of this bill is really an issue of fairness. Now, what the criteria is exactly for determining affordability and income level, I think this may need to be reworked or reconsidered on a periodic basis. But I think the core of this bill is valid. I think that providing transparency so that we understand that those who occupy these units are deserving of this affordability, I think is very, very important. We know that a number of affordable housing units are occupied by individuals who are above the income threshold, and I think that there's such a crisis. We simply morally cannot condone that.
Thank you.
Thank you. Great question. Great issue.
While the LGBTQ movement has experienced a great deal of success, there are miles to go before the community can rest. The state has passed laws granting the right of surrogacy to these communities and others as well, allowing parentage of children conceived through assisted reproduction. As we see with the adoption process, biology is no longer the basis for determining parentage in New York. But the LGBT community continues to face discrimination and prejudice. What are those areas, and what laws would you like to see enacted to end all forms of discrimination and prejudice. Amber.
This is, thank you, Sylvia. I mean, this is one of those situations where for every step of the process, you're always reminded of the inequality in this system, whether or not it has to be with the forms that you fill out, even if you have an agency or a system that you're working with, we need to have that updated. That has to be done in Albany. You know, my wife and I, we have 2 children. My wife had to be put down as the father of our children on the form. So we have a lot of work to do to make sure that we put supportive systems in place at every level. There need to be laws. Listen, I support surrogacy. I mean, there are wonderful families in this community that we go to school with, that our children go to school with, that those families wouldn't exist without surrogacy. There are a lot of families right now that are facing discrimination that went first to try to adopt, and there were so many challenges for them that surrogacy was the only thing that really was available to them at that period in their life. So we have to be able to support that. There are so many things that when people talk about this, they talk about how far we've come. And I think it's lucky for them that they live in that situation to talk that way, because for a lot of other people, they're not experiencing that same level of equality, even living in the same neighborhood. So there is a lot of income inequality. There's a lot of additional prejudice by those who are in the brown and black communities, who are in the Asian communities who are dealing with this. It's highly, highly complex. We need more people who can come to the table and talk about what it is that they need so that can be provided for them. This community is incredibly diverse, and that sense of one rule is gonna work for everybody doesn't apply here. So education, support, and then legislation to back that up.
Thank you very much. Governor Hochul noted in her State of the State address on the 5th of January that she wants to end New York City's 420A tax abatement program for the development of rental apartments and replace it with something that would create, quote, permanent and deeper affordability for low-income households and ensure maximum efficiency of taxpayer dollars. Some say she hasn't done enough. They say she remains in the pocket of developers, as the governor, as the Real Deal note, and the Real Deal notes that the developers are a key to her plan. Housing advocates say the governor's change doesn't represent the kind of transformational change that they would like to see. In simple terms, her 485W tax break is only a slight improvement over the 421A current tax abatement plan, and her new plan still involves tax breaks to the developers, and it's more of the same. What is your position on the governor's plan to end the 421A tax abatement program with a 485W plan? Layla.
Thank you so much, Sylvia. So what is today? February 2nd, Groundhog Day. This is exactly what that is. This is Groundhog Day. It's deja vu all over again. 421A is rebranded as 485W. All right, nice try. It is slightly more affordable. We go from 20% to 30%. Some of it, like it's category A in a long line of categories that the bill has, is permanently affordable, but it's the same. The tax break is still very robust for the developers, and it is not going to generate the amount of affordable housing that we need. So thank you so much for trying. Go back to the drawing board. This is not going to cut it. The way to tackle it, one way to tackle it that I would push and advocate really strongly is to create land trusts, because the issue that we have, especially in our district, is that the cost of the land is driving the affordability away and the speculation up. Thank you for this question.
Thank you. It appears that most of the candidates continue to back Assemblyman Dick Gottfried's healthcare plan, yet after many years, it still hasn't passed. With this plan not moving, what alternatives to his plan would you suggest as our Assembly representative in Albany? Tony?
Well, never say never. I worked on marriage equality and we always said it's never going to happen, and it did. You have to just keep fighting. I have faith that Dick Gottfried and working with legislators will pass some sort of healthcare act. Look, just last week at a committee, they passed healthcare expansion for undocumented New Yorkers who also, healthcare is a human right. And if it does not get passed, we will continue. I would continue to fight to find an affordable single-payer healthcare so no one goes without healthcare. It is a human right, and I think if we work together, many folks I know from CRDC has worked on this issue for a long time. We will get there. We thought we would never get there with marriage equality. I think if we keep fighting, we will have healthcare for all. The exact kind of system, I mean, that's complex conversation that could take hours. Over a martini, we should talk about it. We need to figure out a way to ensure that everyone is covered by healthcare. No one should be bankrupted because they get sick. No one should lose a home because their healthcare is inadequate. Freelancers and my artist friends who suffered through this economic crisis should be able to be guaranteed healthcare like somebody who is wealthy and was successful in life.
Thank you. Among the things that the governor has said she wants to focus on in healthcare are for older people and people with disabilities, Medicaid coverage using the same income resource eligibility rules that are used for other adults. A second thing she's also wants to focus on is she has also proposed to eliminate the $9 a month premium for child health plans, the CHP plan, so our children can receive the health care they deserve. And another is extending the Medicaid coverage during a woman's first year post-pregnancy. Which of these three plans I just outlined do you feel is the most important and why? Chris?
Thank you for that question. Wow. When I was working in Brownsville and Ocean Hill, one of the things that came up the most, and also as a liaison to the Women's Caucus and City Council, was mortality rates of mothers during pregnancy, rather during birth. Additionally, there were larger conversations about postpartum depression, mental health issues. So I firmly believe that we need to stem the tide of the loss of mothers during birth, specifically Black and Brown and Hispanic mothers-to-be. It's completely unacceptable that in this state and in this country, we're seeing rising numbers while we see a dramatic increase in wealth in the 1%. I think that's going to be one of the most important things to emphasize in that plan.
Thank you. Community Service Society, a champion of low-income New Yorkers, found that just 2% of the working poor would pay the toll driving into the city for work. They would have to take mass transportation. Do you feel that the expected $1 billion a year generated from congestive pricing would benefit them? And if so, how do you help those who live in the area and are denied an exemption, except for those that are disabled? Tony?
Look, we need a more livable city. We need less cars, and we need more dedicated bike lanes. We need to ensure that congestion pricing is implemented fairly. There should be exemptions for the working class folks who need to drive into the city. But we have a congestion problem, and the environment is at stake. So there needs to be a balance. We need to work with environmental advocates. We need to work with labor organizations, like I've done my entire career in city-state government, to make sure that congestion pricing is implemented fairly. But there's no doubt that we need congestion pricing. There are just too many cars in Manhattan. I look out my window on 37th and 10th. It's dangerous to our kids. It's dangerous when we walk our dogs. There are too many cars. We should encourage public transportation. But that does not mean, it's not mutually exclusive. We should not allow working class folks to suffer, and business folks, when they need to use a car. But it works in other cities. It works in London or Singapore. Congestion pricing will work if it's done properly and it has a community-led approach, input, not just told, but how it should be implemented. The community needs to be involved as it gets implemented for our city.
Thank you. Years ago, when I was a member of Community Board 5, the issue of charter schools coming in and encroaching on the public school system was just being discussed. It was a hot issue then, and it continues to be a hot issue today. Today, the current birth rate has dropped 3.1% in the school-age population, and the enrollment in traditional public schools is dropping faster. The current proposed budget outlines a 4.7 increase of per pupil funding for the city's charter schools. What is your opinion on the state of the public school system in New York City, including charter schools today? And what are your views towards improving the quality of education for our children, especially those children raised by LGBT parents? Amber.
Charter schools, I'm completely opposed to them. Charter schools are schools that compete with our public schools for both resources and money, and we need to be supporting our public schools, period. I don't think that there's any flexibility on this. I went to public school. I went to PS11 here in the neighborhood a long time ago. I graduated from the Bayard Rustin High School for Humanities. My daughter is in public school. She goes to PS11, the same school that I went to. And my wife has been a teacher in this district for 23 years. Education isn't something that we just talk about abstractly. We talk about it every day at the dinner table. And we've seen an increase in charter schools in this community. I mean, it may work for other communities. I'm just talking about within District 75. I have friends that live uptown in Harlem. They feel like there's an opportunity and advantage for their kids. I'm not talking about their district. So I'm going to localize it, but we have friends in our own community who are in charter schools, and they shouldn't be there. They should be in the public school system. A lot of the conversations the parents are having about this competition of resources and this competition of funds, and it's competing families that were once going to the same schools and building a community are now divided on this issue. And for me, it's absolutely clear. Gotta support the public schools.
Thank you. Layla, your opinion on the quality of the New York City public school system today? What are your views towards improving the quality of education, especially those?
As you remember, way back on Community Board 5, when I was the chair of the Education Committee, we led a huge fight against charter schools. As Amber noted, it is a diversion of resources from public education. And why is it a problem? The main issue that I see is that they're not accountable to the same standard. They can dispose of children if their scores are low. they are artificially inflating the student scores. It is just an unfair system. The quality of our education really stems in public schools really stems from small class size. So, as much as we're seeing enrollments decline and we're seeing birth rates decline, A, we don't know if it's permanent. And B, even with this decline, actually the class sizes are too large. And the schools in our district, whether it is PS11, and we have a number of parents who are candidates, who attend or have attended or their children have, so they're very familiar with that. Other schools, PS33, PS212, those schools are overcrowded. And we need to reduce, we need to cap class size. This is absolutely critical. And we need to team up with the unions. They are very strong advocates on this issue. And we need to make sure that both at the state and the city level, because both have jurisdiction in a complicated way, it's a complicated relationship between the two, but we need to make sure that the funding is there so that we can work with the school construction authority, site more schools, build more schools, reduce the class size, not consider that a closet can be used for, teaching the science class. It doesn't work this way. There is a number of legislations that are up in Albany, and I would become the champion to actually make sure that class size reduction becomes a reality.
Thank you. Thank you. Governor Hochul's budget proposal has the state taking over more than $5 billion in local Medicaid growth, a measure projected to save New York City $2.6 billion. What are your views about improving the quality of health care in the 75th, especially for the homeless and those suffering from mental illness, if you are elected to the Assembly? Chris.
Thank you. As we've seen over the last 2 years, the mental health crisis is right in front of us, especially here in Hell's Kitchen and in Hudson Yards, Penn Station, Moynihan Station, and in Chelsea. One of the most important things that we need to do with that budget is ensure that we're funding social service and outreach programs, number one. We're not doing that right now. In the last forum with Hell's Kitchen Democrats, I called for taking that money, not just to identify the problem at site, but to identify the problem at its source. And that means going in to funding $1 million blocks. The same communities that you were just talking about suffering from mass incarceration also suffer from a lack of access to healthcare. We're number 20 in the country for lack of access to healthcare. To solve our mental health problems, to solve our homeless problems, we need to go to the root. We need to address the housing problems in places like Bed-Stuy and East Harlem. And we need to expand what touch points are being done with homeless services and mental health outreach. It's certainly just not enough.
Thank you. In Hell's Kitchen, an application for middle-income housing was changed with reference to the type of housing from building middle-income housing to one of supportive housing, transitional and low-income housing. What is your opinion on the change in status of this project, and do you support it? Tony.
I do support it. I've talked to Charles King at Housing Works, and it's necessary that we have supportive housing for folks living long-term HIV/AIDS. And I think what happened there was the process, not the outcome. I think that we should also have middle-income housing and increase the AMI. We need to ensure there's affordable housing for every type of New Yorker. But I do support the supportive housing project in Hell's Kitchen. What I really think that all the districts of our great city should have some fair share of supportive housing, not just the 75th. We shouldn't be the only district that has supportive housing. I support that project, but it should be fair for the entire city. that we have supportive housing.
Thank you. Bringing money and improving business into our neck of the woods is important. One of the governor's ideas that she has recently proposed is to open up the proposals for 3 casinos, and then casinos in all the boroughs of the city of New York. The budget director for the governor said the proposal doesn't specify new casinos in New York City, but notes an interest in building there. The first 3 licenses will probably be focused in the downstate area. Given many of the issues that we've discussed this evening, what are your views with respect to allowing casinos in the borough of New York? Chris.
Thank you. Actually, it's really funny that you bring this up. I truly appreciate it. I was actually watching mayoral candidate Andrew Yang discuss this. I think there was a grand plan to turn Governor's Island into like a little Macau, a little Monaco. It's wholly inappropriate. It's wholly inappropriate. We are dealing with a heroin epidemic. We are dealing with a gun violence epidemic. The iron pipeline from the south to New York City is real. We haven't even dealt with that yet. We haven't dealt with our healthcare policies, and we've just opened up online gambling to the entirety of New York State. We don't have our priorities straight. And if we're going to turn Midtown, in this instance, I would assume it would be somewhere in Times Square that they would scope for something like that. If we're not prioritizing now what we desperately, sorely need and has been emphasized through the pandemic, a casino, a physical casino, is going to be a blight that is going to destroy the residential communities of Chelsea and Hell's Kitchen. I'm not for it at all. And I'm very cautious to embrace online gambling already. Thank you.
I thank you very much. I've been speaking now for 2 hours and 19 minutes. I think that my co-leader would like to be heard if he's still awake, if I have not completely put him to sleep. Where are you, Charles? I think he went to bed. I'm not sure.
No, he's there. He's there.
Yes, still here. I think at this point, I'm well, not. It's unnecessary to continue. Most of the topics have been covered. Okay.
Thank you.
Most people are tired, and they want, and you covered most of the subjects. The
Well, you
participants
mean
are
we
tired.
can't go another 4 hours? Okay.
I know. So I think
Let's go another hour. Let's go another hour.
Listen, in closing, I want to thank all of you for coming
Thank you, Sylvia.
tonight. All of the people, we had over 70 people on tonight. And
showing.
I know it's exhausting to be answering questions at rapid fire. I want to thank you all very much, and good night for Chelsea.
Good night. Good night, everyone.
Thank you
Good
all.
night,
Thank
everyone.
you so much.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Good night.
Sylvia.
Good night now.
Thank you, everybody.
Good night, Senator.
Good night. How do I get out of here? Oh.